What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On NBA, the biggest stories with the local experts. I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, also host of Locked On Rockets right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Today, we'll be chatting with Matt George of Locked On Kings. The Sacramento Kings were one of the teams to make a splash at the NBA trade deadline, bringing in Domantas Sabonis and sending out Tyrese Haliburton. How has that move looked for the Kings so far? Was it truly a win-now move, or was it a move made more so with eyes set on the future? But first, a quick message for my friends over at BetOnline, because it's that time of year again as college basketball's tournament is finally upon us. From all the latest odds, contests, and player props, BetOnline.net is the number one source for all of your sports betting needs and info. And you know it's going to be crazy with March Madness right around the corner. BetOnline remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sporting wagering information needs, including live betting and your favorite Vegas casino games. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action available to you. BetOnline, where the game starts. Joining us now is Matt George from Locked On Kings. You can follow on Twitter at MattGeorgeSAC. Now, Matt, one of the big acquisitions made just ahead of the NBA trade deadline this season was the Sacramento Kings picking up Domantas Sabonis from the Indiana Pacers. And when that trade was originally made, there was, I feel like, a lot of optimism that this was kind of a win-now move for the Sacramento Kings and that this would be the thing that helped push them towards the play-in, towards the playoffs, and that Sabonis and De'Aaron Fox would be this dynamic 1-2 punch, and we haven't seen that quite coalesce to this point. Unfortunately, the Kings just 4-9 since Sabonis entered the lineup. What are you seeing take place, with his addition to this Kings group?
Yeah, I think it's actually a significant oversight for people to look at this and think that it's only a win-now move and to judge it based off of that alone. However, my feelings on the situation is if you're trading away Tyrese Haliburton, you better get better immediately. And the Kings haven't necessarily gotten better immediately as a team, but certain players have gotten better since Haliburton's departure. Not saying it's Haliburton's fault that or like he was holding anybody back, because that certainly wasn't the case at all. But this Kings team seems to be playing better overall since that trade was made. But Monty McNair made it very clear in his press conference after the deadline was completed. He said, look, this move, we'd love to make the play-in and playoffs right now, of course, but this move is about the future. And the fact that the Kings traded for a two-time All-Star who fits the timeline of their current star, De'Aaron Fox, both around 24, 25 years old, has 2 more years left on his contract. That's a significant piece. Now, that's not the 5 to 7 years of control that they had over Tyrese Haliburton. So there's certainly an accelerated timeline and a risk factor to that. But it's significant to know that this isn't just a rental. The Kings weren't just making this move to try and compete with the New Orleans Pelicans and the San Antonio Spurs and the Portland Trail Blazers for this this final 10th play-in spot. Although I will say my initial reaction to that, or to the trade, was that they were going to be going for that race. And I didn't think it was a coincidence that the Kings made their move the same day that the Pelicans pulled the trigger for CJ McCollum. So in a very broad way of looking at it, I think the Kings would have preferred to make the play-in and win games right now. Fox and Sabonis just hit it off. The team comes together. The Kings go on a run, and all of a sudden they're in the play-in. I think we all would have celebrated that, even if it affects the Kings draft lottery odds. But just because the Kings aren't accomplishing that doesn't mean that anybody views this trade as a failure so far.
And in that too, I do agree. I share the sentiment, right? It can be a trade that could have both been, a win now move, in the current mindset, but also a move that is made with eyes towards the future and kind of pairing De'Aaron Fox with, a running mate that is a bit more maybe complementary to him, fits a little bit better alongside him. And in that regard, Matt, what have you seen out of Fox and Sabonis as a duo, and what those two guys can potentially look like, not necessarily just for the rest of this season, but for the future for the Sacramento Kings team?
Well, your question is about Fox and Sabonis as a duo, which I will address, but we have to also point out Fox as an individual, because this is something that I think is overshadowed. Because if you compare the numbers, a lot of people, when they see a trade of, there are other pieces involved in this deal, but essentially this trade was a Tyrese Haliburton to Domantas Sabonis swap, right? Like those were the best players, and that's what we focus on. Tyrese's numbers in Indiana have been impressive. He's also getting a boatload of minutes on a bad team. Some would call it empty stats. I don't like taking anything away from a player. Tyrese is playing really good basketball right now. Pacers fans should absolutely be thrilled with Tyrese as a part of their rebuild, actually the center of their rebuild. I think he's going to be very, very good. His numbers and Sabonis's numbers. Sabonis is now like 43 or 44 double-doubles on the season, hasn't played the last couple of games because of suspension, and then he missed the most recent game because I believe his child was born just recently. But numbers wise, they're pretty even. You would give maybe the edge in some ways to Haliburton. You give the edge in some ways to Domantas Sabonis, but it's pretty even. And when you compare a second-year player to a two-time All-Star, maybe you expect Sabonis's numbers to be better than Tyrese's. But a massive factor of this trade is how well De'Aaron Fox is playing. Like, he's on a 10-game stretch where he's shooting over 50% from the field. His three-point shooting percentage is hovering around 40%, which is fantastic. He's back to being that go-to scorer who can coast to 20 points per game. I think he has a streak of 15 straight 20 points per game, or 20 points in a game for 15 straight games. He had a 41-point performance or 42 points the other night, multiple 30-point games. We're seeing Fox get back to that superstar that we had not seen at all this season. And I think it largely has to do with he and Tyrese Haliburton just did not work together and fit together as well as Kings fans and the Kings front office was hoping for. Now, that being said, when we talk about the duo of the two of them, Fox still needs more help. And in Sabonis's best game as a King, where he went off for over 30 points, Fox didn't have a good game. So Fox still needs to find out how to be that guy while his teammates are also getting theirs. And that's what's been most impressive recently about this stretch of, even though the Kings have been losing games, Fox is scoring 30, 40 points, but also dishing out 10, 11 assists. Like, that's a big boost for De'Aaron, especially with the assist numbers that Tyrese brought with him to Indiana, and we know how much of the passing game falls into the lap of Domantas Sabonis. The reality is Fox has never had a player as good as Domantas Sabonis to play with at any point in his career. It's going to take time for the two to get comfortable together, but Fox has been asking for a Sabonis-type player for a long time, and the last two off seasons, the biggest moves the Kings have made, drafting two guards. So I imagine he was not happy with that. He seems very pleased to have Sabonis here. And while I don't know how much we're going to get out of them for the remainder of this season, what they're able to do next season with hopefully a revamped roster this offseason, that's where really the big where we're going to really see the results of this trade. And also, all excuses for De'Aaron Fox, they're now gone.
The last, stretch for De'Aaron Fox that you highlighted, I mean, it is really impressive. Just over the last 10 games, just 10-game averages, he's averaging 30 a night on, 39% shooting from three, over 50% shooting from the floor. The assist numbers are up across the board. Yeah, it's been impressive to see what he's been able to put together. But you talk about, this offseason being crucial for the Kings, what they're going to try and do moving forward. And a big question for that, not just, looking at the rest of the roster and the pieces that you put around De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis. But I think a big question mark for me especially is what is the future of Alvin Gentry with this Kings organization? Is he going to be the guy who is going to be here next season? Are you out on Gentry as the coach?
Yeah, Gentry has no chance. And I say that with all the love and respect in the world because Alvin took over a very tough situation, and Alvin is extremely well respected, very well liked. I don't blame what happened to the Kings this season on Alvin Gentry. Hell, I don't even blame it on Luke Walton. I think this Kings team was an absolute disaster. They've been a disaster for years, and they needed to make these trades. Luke Walton was, I mean, you had to make that move, I guess, even though Walton, in my mind, he might not have been the solution, but he certainly wasn't the problem. And I think that's been pretty clear with how bad the team has been or how bad they were since Walton was fired and Gentry came in. But to answer your question, like, Gentry has no chance. The only chance that he has is the Kings putting together like an undefeated run for the remainder of the season, a Phoenix Suns bubble-esque run that actually gets them into the playoffs, and then he probably still needs to have the Kings win a legitimate playoff series to have a chance. Like, that's legitimately where I'm at. Unfortunately, I think Monte McNair wasted last offseason to get this coaching search done, and now, for the first time in the Vivek Ranadive era, I expect a full legitimate coaching search. And Jackson, that's not a joke. Like, in Vivek's 8, 9, something like that seasons that he's been here, the Kings have never once executed a full coaching search. They've always just kind of hired the first guy that they see available. They didn't even interview people when they fired Dave Yeager and brought in Luke Walton. Monty Williams wanted the job. They didn't even interview him. Like, the Kings need to go through a full legitimate coaching search. I expect Alvin to be a part of that search out of courtesy, but he doesn't have much of a shot. I couldn't name for you which guy I want at this point in time. Whoever he is, he just needs to stick around for longer than 3 years.
Will the Kings be able to put together a push and make the play-in this season, or are the eyes set exclusively on the future and what this duo of De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis can potentially bring to Sacramento down the line? You're going to have us covered for all of that and more, of course, over at Locked On Kings. Matt, appreciate you stopping by Locked On NBA with me.
Always a pleasure.